Hi, Dana here. Today we're talking a little bit about reaching out, which is kind of this idea of missions and what is the church's role in that. Oftentimes we get this idea that to be doing missions, we need a program, or it's something that's optional that we'll do on the side if we have enough time, or that we commission a number of people and then we send them out and then we as church have completed our mission. But God has a little bit of a different plan. God doesn't have the church so that missionaries can be sent out. God has a church so that missions can happen, so that God's mission in the world will happen. The church is the missionary. This is something that we see all the way in the beginning of Genesis, where God calls Abraham and says to him, go from your country and your kindred and your father's house to the land that I will show you. I will make of you a great nation, and I will bless you and make your name great, so that you will be a blessing. Abraham is called and blessed so that he can be a blessing, so that he can be an agent and a worker in God's world and fulfill God's mission, work alongside God to help God fulfill the mission that God has for the world, that peace and justice and shalom and the well-being of all things can happen in every place, so that God's kingdom can come on earth as it is happening in heaven, to make a little bit of earth a little bit more like heaven. And Abraham is called out to do this. And then we begin to see that Israel is called out to do this. Israel is called out of Egypt and blessed and led by God to do the same sorts of things as Abraham had been invited into. And what ends up happening is that the Israelites often fail in this mission. We see this in the prophets a lot. I'm sure they succeeded in different places, but in the prophets, we see that the prophets are always like, hey guys, we're not quite hitting the mark. We're not really fulfilling God's mission to love and care for and remember the orphan and the widow, the stranger in our land. We are not making earth a little bit more like heaven here. We are not working alongside God in the way that God has called us to as a nation. And so when Jesus comes, there's this crazy thing that happens. Jesus becomes the one who is fulfilling the mission of Israel. Jesus goes throughout the land and brings the mission of God to earth and shows us what it means to live out that mission. And then, once we have seen that in Jesus, Jesus leaves and tells his disciples and the church through the Spirit that we are now the ones who have been blessed to be a blessing in the world, to make the earth a little bit more like heaven, or as we say, God's kingdom, so that God's kingdom will come. This is our role. This is our mission. This is the reason why we as church are called together, is that we might be encouraged and blessed in our gatherings together and then sent out into the world to work alongside God wherever we find ourselves every day, to bring about God's love and justice and flourishing and peace and healing and wholeness of relationships to every place we enter. And so, the question that I have for you is this: as you have been sent out, where is it that maybe you are being invited to bring God's healing and wholeness? How does your job fulfill the mission of God? How does your parenting fulfill the mission of God? Or maybe your volunteering or your grandparenting or your being a friend? Or how close can you get to the margin of society so that God's healing and justice can come there? And when I say fulfill God's mission, I mean take part in it, because who are we to think that we can fulfill the mission of God? Only God can take the seeds that we plant and the things that we sow and grow it into God's kingdom. So as you go about your daily life, consider that. What is it that you've been called to do that only you can do in this world to help bring about God's mission? Grace and peace.